Let's look at test number 1, which actually covers chapter 6 only. So the first question, factor completely. And the problem is 7x to the 4th plus 49x squared. If you remember, the first rule in factoring is find out the greatest common factor. And when you look at the 7x to the 4th, you can write that 7x squared times x squared. And the 49, you can write that 7 times x squared. So when you look at that, you will see that both of them have 7x squared. Notice this one has 7x squared, so is this one. So that's my greatest common factor. So if I pull that in the front there, what's left in the first group? What's left is that term, which is what? X squared plus what's left here is that 7. And we just factor problem number 1. Number 2, find the greatest common factor for 7x squared y plus 14xy plus 21x. Now when you look at them slowly, that means what? 7 times x times the y. That's this one. The 14 is 7 times 2 times x times y. The 21 is what? 7 times 3 times x. We need to find what all three terms have in common. Quickly, you probably can see they all have a 7 in them. Is that the only thing they share? No. What else do they have in common? It has to be the same thing. They all have one x in them common. Can I take this x? No, because this doesn't have any more x's. This doesn't have any x's left. Can I take y? Well, this has y, this doesn't. So the greatest common factor of all three of them, the biggest thing they share is 7x. Again, find the greatest common factor. And here we have 3x to the 3rd minus 6x squared plus the 12x. The 6 is actually 2 times 3, and the 12 is 4 times 3. So I can make that 3x to the 3rd minus the 6, which is what? 2 times 3 times x squared. The 12 is 3 times 4 times the x. And you can see quickly they all have 3 as common to all three terms. What about the 4? Nope, this has 4 is 2 times 2. So there's a 2 here, there's a 2, but this doesn't have a 2. So what about x's? So we know 3 is common to all of them. This one has 3 x's, this one has 2, this has only 1. So the greatest common factor is 3x. That is the largest thing that all three of them share. Can't be x squared, this doesn't have 2. Has only 1 x in it. This has 2, this one has 3. Question 4. Factor completely. I'm going to say factor. When I say factor, it means factor completely. X squared plus 10x plus 21. The first thing, do they have anything in common we can take out, put in the front? No. Okay, now notice this sign is positive in case you forgot your factoring. If this is positive, that means both signs will be the same as the one before it. So in this case, both going to be positive. So the x squared is x, and both signs going to be positive. Now let me look at the 21. How do you get positive 21? 21 is 21 times 1, or 7 times 3. Can only use positive values. What's the sum here? The sum is 22. What's the sum here? That's 10. Notice that 10 matches that number. That tells me my numbers are 7 and 3. And it doesn't matter which one you write first. The next one, factor c squared minus 5c minus the 14. This sign is minus. That tells me we're going to have different signs. That means one is positive, one is negative. So this is going to be C, one is positive and the other one is negative. So here's the negative 14. How do you get negative 14? Negative 14 times 1, or 14 times a negative 1, or 7 times a negative 2, or negative 7 times 2. Let's look at the sum. That's negative 13. This is 13. This is 5. This is negative 5. You want the sum to be what? Negative 5. Notice that matches. So it's negative 7, positive 2. The negative goes with the 7. The positive goes with the 2. It has to be this one. Factor completely. Three x squared minus 2x minus the 1. Notice this number is not a 1, which makes it not fun, because we have to use the trial and error method. Guessing game, basically. To get 3x squared, you can get that either by multiplying 3x times 1x. That's really the only case. I said either. There is no either. Unless I use the negative, but we're not going to use the negative here. And the minus 1 is 1 times the negative 1, and that's it. So we call trial error method because we're going to try the 3x here and the 1x here. And because this sign is minus, notice this sign is negative, that tells me we have different signs. That's why I have one positive, one negative. So that's why I'm going to try the plus 1 and the minus 1. I have no idea if that will do it or not. And if I FOIL this, what's 3x times x? That's the 3x squared. What's 1 times a minus 1? That's the minus 1 here. So the only question is, do I have negative 2x? And to answer that, you multiply these two and these two. What's 1 times x? 1x. What's minus 1 times 3x? Negative 3x. When you add them, that's what? Negative 2x, and that's what you want it to be. So that is correct. So that's the correct factoring. Let's try another one. Factor 2x squared plus 8x plus 6. Now notice this one, if you look at it, they all have 2 common. The greatest common factor is a 2 here. So if I take a 2 out, what's left? X squared plus 8 divided by 2, which is 4, and I still have the x. 6 divided by 2, which is the 3. Now again, when we say factor, that means factor completely. Am I done? Or can I factor this one more? Let's look at this. If I'm going to factor that, because this sign is positive, that tells me both signs are going to be the same as that one. They're both going to be negative. So there's the 2 in the front, and let's factor that one. We know both signs are going to be positive. Let's see. The plus 3, it's only 3 times 1. That's it. That's the only way to get a plus 3 using positive numbers. And what's the sum? What's 3 and 1? That's 4. Which matches that number? So that tells me one of these numbers is going to be a 1, the other one is going to be a 3. It doesn't matter which one. And that's my answer. Again, factor completely. 3x squared minus 7x plus the 2. This sign is positive. That tells me both signs the same. Both would be negative. So to get a 2, I'm going to have negative 2 times a negative 1. And that's the only way to get a plus 2 using negative numbers only. And 3x squared is 3x and 1x. And let me try the first one. The first one, I'm going to try 3x and x. Put a negative 2 here, put a negative 1 here. Do I have negative 7x? Let's see. Let's multiply. That's negative 2x. That's negative 3x. When you combine them, that's what? Negative 5x. Is that what you want it to be? No, that's wrong. What's the other option? Let's flip the 1 and the 2. Let's put the minus 1 here and the minus 2 there. And let's see now if we have the negative 7x. Negative 1x. Negative 6x, when you add them, that's what? Negative 7x. Bingo, it matches that number. So that's correct. That means this is correct. Let's look at number 9. Factor completely. P squared minus 6p plus 9. Again, this sign is positive. It tells me both signs are going to be the same. In this case, both would be negative. So it's p minus and p minus. They're both going to be negative. So here's the plus 9. I can get a plus 9 using negative numbers as negative 9 times a negative 1 or negative 3 times a negative 3. Let's look at the sum of these numbers. What's negative 9, negative 1? That's a negative 10 when you add them. That doesn't match. What's a negative 3 plus a negative 3? Negative 6 you're adding here. That does match. So the two numbers are the negative 3's. And since they're the same, maybe you want to write that p minus 3 squared. It's the same thing. Factor completely. X squared plus 24x plus 144. Again, this sign is positive. That tells me both signs the same as this. They're both going to be positive. So both numbers will be positive. Let's look at the 144. How do you get positive 144 using only positive factors? That's 144 times 1. But when you look at the sum of this, that's 145. That's not good. Doesn't match. What other option? 12 times 12 is 144. When you add them, that's what? 24. Perfect. It matches. 12 and 12. So that's x plus 12 squared. Factor completely. I don't know why I keep writing completely. I don't have to write it. 4m squared minus 1. Notice you have two terms. So I should be thinking of the difference of two squares. Anytime you have two things with squared with a sign minus between them, you can factor that a minus b, a plus b. I should be thinking of that. But that doesn't look like something squared. I can make it something squared as 2m squared minus, the 1 is actually 1 squared. 1 is like a wild card. 1 to any power is 1. Now that fits that look. A is the 2m, b is the 1. So when you factor that, that's 2m minus 1, 2m plus 1. And notice they're not the same, so I can't put them together and make it a square. On the same idea, factor again. 16y squared minus 25. Two terms, just like this, a minus sign between them, just like this. The only difference, this number is not squared and the 16 is not squared. But if I rewrite that, that becomes 4y, the whole thing squared. That's how you get that value. 25 is 5 squared. Now that matches this one. So it's 4y minus 5. 4y plus 5. Solve for x. X squared minus x equals 0. If you remember, when we solve in quadratic equation, one of the methods is solve by factoring. And to factor that, you got to move everything to one side. That's done for us. Step number 2, factor completely. Well, the only thing I can factor is take an x out of both of them. If I take an x out of this, there's an x left there, and there's a 1 left here. Not a 0, 1. Because if it's 0, what's x times 0? You don't have that term there. So you factor completely. Now set each factor equal to 0 and solve it. X equals to 0, that's one answer. X minus 1 equals to 0. X equals to 1. So we have two solutions, 0, 1. Let's do a few more with solving here, but I'll make it more interesting. Solve for x. Six x squared minus x equals to 1. Again, move everything to one side. That's your first step. So this becomes 6x squared minus x minus 1 is equal to 0. Next, factor completely. How do we factor that? Well, 6x squared, I can try 3x times the 2x, or 6x times 1x. The minus 1, there's only one option, 1 times a minus 1. So let me try and factor that. Let me try the 3x and the 2x, and let me try the plus 1 here and the minus 1 here. Let's see if that's correct. Because if it is, I can solve it. If it's not, I got to try. So I'm trying this with this. If it doesn't work out, I'll flip-flop the 1 and the minus 1. I'll put the minus 1 here and the 1 there. If it still doesn't work out, I'll try the 6x and the 1x in place of 3x and 2x. So this is 2x, negative 3x. When you add them, that's what? Negative 1x or negative x, which is good. That matches that. So my factoring here is good. Move to one side, factor completely. We did that. Set each factor equal to 0 and solve it. To solve this, take the plus 1 there, becomes 3x equals minus 1. And to solve for x, we divide both sides by 3. This one, take the minus 1 to this side, change sign. That becomes a plus 1. And to solve for x, I need to divide this side by 2, which means divide that one by 2. X equals 1/2. So these are my two answers. Both are good. Both are solution to that problem. Let's try another one. Solve for x. X squared minus x equals 42. Again, move everything to one side. Factor completely. X squared is x and x. And 42 is what? 6 times 7 is 42. So that's a negative 7, positive 6. Because you want the sum to be minus 1x. Notice, that's negative 7x. That's plus 6x. The net result is minus 1x. That's what you want it to be. Now set each factor equal to 0 and solve it. So to make that 0, remove the minus 7 there, x equals 7. Move the plus 6 there, x equals what? Negative 6. Those are the two answers. Another one. Solve for x. X squared plus 8x plus 15 is equal to 0. Move it to one side. It's done for me. Factor completely. X plus 5, x plus 3. That gives me the 8x and the 15. Set each factor equal to 0 and solve it. X equals negative 5. X equals negative 3. Two solutions. Notice I'm going through the factoring quickly because we cover that on about 4 or 5 videos. So if you're having a hard time with the factoring, I recommend to go back to my early videos and watch the factoring. Factoring is an important piece here. A couple more problems, then we'll call this review over. Where do we use a quadratic equation? Why are we interested? Let's say I give you this problem. Let me think of one. 10 more than the square of a number is 7 times the number. Find all such numbers. Let's see. 10 more than the square of a number. Now, does anyone know what that number is? The number is unknown. Let's give it the letter X. 10 more than the square of the number. What's the square of the number? That's X squared. That's the square of the number. 10 more than that. That means add to it 10. Is means equal. 7 times the number. The number is X. So now let's go through it and see if we can solve that. Find what the numbers are. Bring everything to one side. Factor completely. Notice this sign is positive, which tells me both signs the same as this. So it's going to be both negative. Ten is negative 10 times negative 1, and negative 2 times a negative 5. What's the sum of them when you add? That's a negative 11, that's a negative 7. That's what you want it to be. So it's a 2 and a 5. Set each factor equal to 0 and solve it. X equals 2, X equals 5. So both of these actually will work. Another question. I'll do 2 more, 3 more. The length of one leg of a right triangle is 5 centimeters. The hypotenuse is 1 centimeter more than the other leg. Find the length of the hypotenuse. Sounds like a lot of writing. Here we go. We have a right triangle. Right triangle looks like this. Right means 90 degrees. The length of one leg is 5 centimeters. Let's make this 5. The hypotenuse is one more than the other leg. This is the other leg. Do we know what that value is? No. Let's call it x. It says the hypotenuse, that's this side, is 1 centimeters more than. More than means add. More than this. So this is really x plus 1. And if you remember your Pythagoras theorem from high school, it says c squared equals a squared plus b squared. That's Pythagoras theorem. So x plus 1 squared equals 5 squared plus x squared. And now solve that equation. This is x plus 1 times x plus 1 equals 25 plus x squared. When you FOIL this, remember you're FOILing from algebra? This will be x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 25 plus x squared. Now that's a quadratic. I'm going to bring everything to one side and try to solve it. When I bring that x squared to this side, I'll have x squared. That x squared comes in, becomes a minus x squared plus the 2x plus the 1 minus the 25 is equal to 0. And notice what happened to the x squared. They will cancel each other out. I have 2x minus what? 24 is equal to 0. Move the negative 24 back there. 2x equals 24. X equals 24 divided by 2, which is 12. So if this is 5, that means this has to be what? 12, and this has to be 13. The question, what's the hypotenuse? 13. And I think you get the idea of that test. That's really what the test is going to look like. So I'll stop here. And that's review of test number 1.